Let's talk about interpersonal relationships. You know, I grew up as a pretty shy kid, and I was able to get away with that. I come from a pretty small town, populations like in the low tens of thousands. And for most of my life, I had pretty much the same friend group, at least for the first 18 or so years of my life. I had friends from preschool that are still my friends today, and some of my best friends today. Um, and most of my best friends I met when I was like 4 or 5 years old, back all the way back in like Chinese school. But the thing about life is like sometimes you need to change things up a little bit. When I moved away for college, I suddenly found myself in a very new environment, and a very new culture as well. I go to college. Well, I live in New York City now, and it's kind of a culture shock going from a small town all the way to like one of the biggest cities, at least in the U.S. I'm not sure about the world. But yeah, and I think I was lucky. I found my friend group in college very early on during like the first week of orientation, and pretty much like by pure chance or by pure coincidence. Like for further context, like it was crazy. One of my friends that I had like talked to on Instagram before we came to college, we bumped into one of her friends that she had already talked to, and then we met his friend group from that, and now that friend group is like my friend group as well. So it's like I don't know. I feel like very grateful, but also at the same time, I think sometimes when you jump into things too early, um, you're almost more willing to compromise on certain things. Because out of that friend group, there was one person that I became like particularly close with. Like, we would sometimes like we'd start getting meals together, and then we'd like go back to my dorm and just like yap about random stuff. And we also had like the same interests as well. Like we both played Minecraft. Both were pretty much like at least at the time interested in engineering. Um, both interested in like the same video games, all that stuff. And so we like connected pretty early, pretty quickly. And then I guess as things like progressed, we started hanging out more and more just because at some point it almost felt like natural, like oh, this person like you would always like ask me out to like get like lunch and stuff, get dinner, or like to play video games, all that good stuff. And at the time, I think I was just happy to find someone who I was able to connect with, like very easily connect with on a pretty good emotional level. I'm someone who, because of my upbringing and just the fact that most of my closest friends I've known since I was probably 5 or 6, it takes a lot for me to get comfortable with someone. And it also takes a long time for me to get comfortable with someone. I'm someone who doesn't feel comfortable like rushing into things, whether that be friendships or just pretty much anything in general. It doesn't even have to necessarily be interpersonal relationships. But why am I bringing this up? It's because I think at some point we started seeing, I guess, our friendship a little bit differently. I'm someone who, because I was so shy in high school, wanted to branch out a lot more in college. And for the first 1 or 2 weeks, the first little bit of college, I would consider myself pretty successful at it. I met a lot of people who I never would have talked to in high school. and I became at least acquaintances, if not friends, with a lot of people that I would have never talked to in high school, and I was having a pretty good time. But I think my friends saw our friendship a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is he started thinking of us as more inseparable than we were and than we should have been. And at first this wasn't really a problem. You know, like we were both chilly with each other, we had fun with each other. So everything, at least on the surface, seemed fine. What the fuck? But then over time, I kind of realized that, like, ooh, I'm having every single meal with this guy. Like, I'm not seeing many of my other friends. And at some point, whenever he came to my dorm, he would just come, like, without asking. Which by itself wasn't really a huge problem, and it's also partly, like, my fault, because I never really told him. I was kind of a pussy in the first semester of college, so I wasn't very confrontational. I didn't really like bringing up stuff. What the fuck? Ooh, okay. And I was someone who, I guess, was a little bit scared to change the status quo, at least because I was comfortable in the moment. And this started to become a problem, because my other friends, and I didn't really know this at the time, but they were not huge fans of this one friend. And because of that, they tended to not really invite him out to hang out with them. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I won't really dive into, just because it's, first of all, there's a lot of private stuff, and also just because I don't feel comfortable, or I just don't want to. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, you guys can go fuck yourselves. Anyways, holy shit. This usually wouldn't have been a big problem. But at some point, I think they almost stopped inviting me to go out as well. Like, our friend group, or at least the friend group I made in the first few weeks of college, we were very big. I think we, at our max, were around 15-ish people. So that's a lot of people, that's a lot of relationships that you need to maintain, all that stuff. Holy fuck. And the thing about, like, having that many people is that you tend to start having subgroups form. For context, a couple of the people in our friend group had gone to the same high school together. And these people, because they were, I guess, the loudest, also kind of became the core of the overall group. And that's not really a bad thing by itself, but I think what people, I guess, don't realize is how much unspoken influence certain people can have in a group. And let's just say some of them, because they did not fuck with my friends, they started hanging out with me less as well, because whenever I would pull up, he would also pull up. And at least for the first semester, I never really saw this as, like, a problem, just because, you know, like, I felt like what I had was I was comfortable with what I had. It wasn't like, damn, okay, anyways, it wasn't as if I wasn't fully satisfied, but I was comfortable enough that I wasn't really willing to break what I had. Which is not exactly a healthy mindset to have. And I think at some point, both of us kind of just accepted the way things were as the status quo. Like, we learned that other people in our friend group had made a separate group chat, and I don't know, he seemed to be a lot more bothered about it than I was. Like, I didn't really care, but he would sometimes bring it up while we were having meals, whatever. Anyways, I feel like I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but like, fast forward to winter break, or maybe even a little bit after winter break, I started thinking to myself, man, you know, I really want to hang out with other people a little bit more. Like, I like this, like hanging out with my friend, but there's just like some little things, and also like little things that weren't like deal breakers, but they would just kind of annoy you at times. And also just because there were other people in the friend group that I really enjoyed hanging out with, and I missed hanging out with them. And also just because like I wanted to, you know, get out of my dorm a little bit more, because throughout the first semester I was kind of a homebody. And I didn't really tell them this though, which part of me was like, you know, it's my own thing. Like, I can just kind of do this by myself. Like, I don't really need to tell him this. Like, it's kind of none of his business. Well, that's putting it a little bit rudely, but holy fuck. But yeah, and then at some point, I think I also realized I was just not super comfortable with the distance between us, because like, he would pull up to my room sometimes, just like without asking. For further context, I guess our friend group used to use this thing called like Life 360, where we would have each other's locations, and the reason for this was just in case any of us ever got lost, or just for safety reasons. But he would start using it just to check people's locations and see where they were, which is not the most, I don't know, I don't even know how to describe it, ethical thing to do, or the most, it wasn't something that people would appreciate, I guess I should put it that way. And at some point, he started using it to just like pull up to my location without asking. Like, sometimes I'd be in my dorm and he would just pull up to my dorm and knock at my door, which by itself is not really a huge issue. But then sometimes, you know, sometimes I would just like want to be by myself, so I wouldn't answer, and then he would start calling me. And sometimes if I didn't answer his text, he would start calling me like excessively. There were times where I would have 5 to like 10 missed calls, and usually I didn't answer because either I was sleeping, I was busy, you know, just for any multitude of reasons. So because of all these things, I just wanted to branch out a little bit more. And I thought I could just kind of do it. I could just kind of create a little bit more distance between us. And he didn't really take it well. And in fairness to him, I also didn't go about it the best way. And I also wasn't the best at communicating back then, so there were sometimes he would ask to get a meal and I would just like brush it off, or he would ask me what I was doing for the weekend and I would just kind of like give a little bit of a non-answer, because at some point I started hanging out with my other friends more, and we would go out and we would want to be like like a set group. Like we don't want other people coming with us, but he always kind of wanted to be included in things, which is very natural. That's people want to fit in, they want other people to like them. But at the same time, sometimes you also gotta accept that, certain people. What the fuck is this? Hang? Huh, I've never seen this before in the parkour. Certain people just like, they enjoy hanging out with more people than others. Anyways, I thought everything would be fine. Like maybe I could have communicated a little bit more. Actually, I definitely could have communicated a little bit more. But also at the same time, I don't think you necessarily owe people communication if you don't want to, unless it's like actively harming them. Then of course that's a bad thing. But if you don't want to talk to them simply because you don't want to, and it's not necessarily hurting them, I feel like that's okay. And that's something that I kind of took away from this entire situation. But he didn't take it well. There were times where I would tell him, oh, I want to eat with other people this week. And I remember there was one exchange where he was like, okay, name everyone that you're going to be eating with this week. Which is just like, call me crazy, but I don't think that's I don't think that's something that you just say to someone. And I think at that point I started realizing, like, I don't know if things are gonna last. And also because I think at some point the honeymoon phase, if you will, kind of ended for me. And I stopped enjoying hanging out with this guy as much as I did before. And I just wanted a little bit more variety in holy shit, in who I hung out with, who my friends were, that type of stuff. And he was not the happiest about that. Let's just say that. Is this a what the fuck? Hello? Anyways, so he was not the happiest about that, and honestly, I can't blame him that much, just because, like, we had already established a status quo, and now I was breaking it without being super communicative. But also at the same time, like, that's still kind of a crazy thing to say to someone. Like, you don't just say name every single person you're gonna be eating with this week. That's not okay. And then after that, I started, avoiding him a little bit more. And I think at some point, my boundaries got kind of violated in a way that is not okay. I'm someone who doesn't get angry very, very easily, who doesn't, I don't, I'm generally a very calm and stoic person, but there are certain things that set me off, and this was one of them. I think a few months prior to this, I had turned off my location on Life360 just because, like, I kind of got uncomfortable with how things, the dynamics that started appearing. I don't especially feel comfortable when someone just pulls up to my dorm without asking. And this by itself isn't really like a a big thing. But then one time, you know, I was out with with a couple of my other friends. We were in New York City's Manhattan Chinatown, and we were just taking a food tour. And I have this app. It's a social media app called Belly, where you kind of rank different restaurants, or not rank, but you rate them, and it's just like a way for foodies to find out where all the best new spots are. And the thing about that is, like, it kind of, what the oh wait, there's slimes. Okay, it kind of reveals where you are, just because, like, I mean, you kind of need to in like if you rank a restaurant, then obviously you were just at that restaurant or you had visited it. And he started checking my location using Belly, which is just that it's not the most. What the hell is this? Oh, wait, there's slime. Okay. You know, that's not. It's not the most okay thing to do to someone. And you know, I asked him, like, why are you checking my location on this app? Like, that's kind of weird. And then he claimed that it was because one of his friends from back home was joining the app, and he hopped on to follow her and saw us in his feed, which turned out to be a lie, or at least I'm pretty sure it was a lie, because I checked. You can check people's following list on Belly, and I checked it. Every single person he was following was from like our college pretty much, and had joined Belly months ago. So I knew this guy was capping to me. And I think that's when I decided to finally stand on business. Like, I remember I sent him like a full novel of text messages. And we basically cut things off. Or at least I cut things off, because I realized, like, I just don't feel comfortable around this guy anymore. I don't feel comfortable, you know, necessarily hanging out with them. I don't feel comfortable. Well, not hang out, like uncomfortable hanging out with them. I just don't feel comfortable with the fact that he's doing things that I'm not okay with. And he took it a lot better than I thought. He accepted it. He, I guess, apologized for a lot of things. There's more things I didn't go into. And that was that. So what's the point of me bringing up this story? I think, honestly, the biggest takeaway from this, for both, I guess, myself, and maybe if anyone else is watching this, I don't know if anyone else will, I'm just kind of shouting into the void right now, is to speak out when things make you uncomfortable, and not just that's a pretty cliche thing to say, but I think to add on to that is to speak out sooner, because I had let this situation fester for so much longer than it should have, and it got to a point where it was very hard to really break things off, or at least I thought so. And I think the second lesson is it's much easier to speak out than you think it is. Like, as soon as I decided to take that first step, it was all over in like an hour. That's how long it took to resolve months of tension that I had built up, I had worried about. It was all gone within the span of an hour. So I guess the moral of the story is, A, speak out earlier, sooner rather than later, and I guess under that, it's a lot easier to finish things than you think it is. Yeah. kind of a long-winded story for what seems like a very obvious moral of the story, but I think that's most stories, let's be honest. Yeah. I'll see you guys later.